Thank you for listening to a Sunday morning sermon from First Christian Church. For more information about these sermons or FCC in general, visit us online at fccflora.com.
So as we look at this experienced generation, I will call them, I don't want to say you're older, but we'll say that you're older than me. So thank you to all of those who have helped me in this process. I sent out a bunch of messages, just what this looks like and what is it like to be retired and what is it like for your family, the dynamic of faith and how you grow and how you change and adapt to this season, because it's a new season of life. And how can we learn and grow from this together? And so for you probably have spent, if you're in this age group, you've probably spent the better of 20 years living this out, right? 20 years of investing in your family. From whether that means, spending countless times you've wiped runny noses, to how many times you change your schedule for every school event, for every practice, every game, every recital, every load of laundry and every other load of laundry you did after that because more needed to be done. For all the times you were a short order cook and you had to make a meal for everyone different because no one could agree on the same thing, right? And the other endless, et cetera, household things that you do day after day after day. This has been your identity. This has been your life. This has been your world for the last 20 plus years. Going through this process of just serving and adapting your family. You've gone through this career. You've established your identity in what you do. And you go hard and you serve day after day after day. You have found the way that you've been able to identify your life. You're the parent of someone, so this is the job that you do. This is your talents and your gifts. And you've spent so much time wrapping your mind about this is who I am. And then the day comes. Your children graduate. And you realize that you're sending them out into the world. That you've been preparing them for this very thing, this very opportunity, and you send them out. And you realize that things change. You don't feel as connected to the people around you as you once did. You go to the ball games and you don't know everyone's names anymore. You don't feel like you're part of the process anymore. Now you feel like you're just stepping back and you feel like you're disconnected. And you find yourself at home one night. It's quiet. You don't hear the chatter you used to. The footsteps aren't there. And you look at your spouse and you say, now what? I guess we could go, you want to see a movie or you want to stay home? Do you want to eat? I'll cook if we need to cook, right? You have those weird, awkward moments because you're like, our whole life has been wrapped around something and now it's changed. It's different. And just like any season of change, any part of life, when change comes, you begin to ask those questions, now what? What do we do? How do we proceed from this? And so here you begin to look at the life that you once knew, that you were so involved and you were active in going about. It just seems so distant, like a memory. Years ago. Maybe you're lucky enough to enter into retirement and you're entering this new season where now that what you've identified as your work and your career has changed. And you no longer have to get up at this certain time and to be a certain place and to dress a certain way. Although most retired people I spoke to said, I like to be busier now than I was when I was working. I just get to pick my schedule. But I enjoy the busyness. I like to move. I like to do those things. And so it's interesting as you begin to focus in on who am I and where do I go now and how am I supposed to be and how am I supposed to parent and how am I supposed to love my spouse and how am I supposed to serve the church when everything's changed. When everything about my life, what I thought was routine and scheduled, is just different. It's how we begin to approach this. It's how we begin to understand. And this role, as you feel, as this search, this longing, the emptiness and the loneliness, is that empty nest syndrome that they define so clearly as just those who just feel like they're missing something. What once was there is now gone. And we all have that in some scenario in life, whether it is at home, and maybe you are an empty nester, or maybe you lost a loved one, or maybe you changed careers, or you can go on. But it's that moment of how do we handle the seasons of loneliness in our lives? Because they can be crippling at times, and they pull us backwards, and they weigh us down, because we feel like I have no one to connect with. I feel like I have no one to reach out to. I have no one to pour into me. And so how do we handle these moments together? And to whether stage you're in, whether you're in this stage that we're talking about today, or maybe you're in a stage of life where a season has changed and you have to start something new, or you're trying a new chapter, things are always in motion. So how do we handle new things in our lives? How do we approach new stages, opportunities, and pursue Christ in the same time? Because in those moments when things change, it can be difficult, because when we leave the comfort of what we once knew and we enter into something new. See, loneliness is something that strikes our communities. It hurts deep, and people strive to fulfill this need, this longing, this want themselves. We see this throughout our community. We can see around our world that people will use food and drugs and physical relationships, material things and work. And for some, just living through the lives of others, I'm just going to live through you to satisfy my own loneliness. See, loneliness can hurt. It's not always bad. Some of you are like, I do best when I'm alone at times. I need breaks. I need to step back. I need to calm down. And we see this in the Bible as well. Remember David, he was fleeing from Saul. He went and hid. We had Jeremiah who felt empty. He felt alone amongst his own people. Saul was by himself at the very end. See, we understand that loneliness isn't bad. But the problem is when we allow loneliness to strike into our hearts, when we allow loneliness to be our identity, we allow that longing that I just feel like I have nothing. It's when it becomes sin, when it becomes to draw us distant from God, rather than running to the one who provides the way for us. We don't want it to become a negative effect on us physically and spiritually, to draw us down and away from the walk that God's called us to. It's how we handle our approach to God in these seasons. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, it says, there's a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens. And it goes on through the next several verses through verse 8, but there's a time to mourn, there's a time for joy, there's time for happy, there's time for sad. We see that through all things, there's a moment and a time, in the same way for us here, in the midst of loneliness and temptation. In those seasons, he says, I've given you and I've equipped you with the opportunities. I've given you the tools on how to handle each stage of life, each feeling, each thought that you have. There's a solution, and it's through me, Jesus. That I've come to pave the way and to show you what it means to walk with me. But for so many, they feel like they're just lost. They feel that deep cut of just hurt because what they once knew isn't the same. And so how do we carry forth with this? And so we see that God, as he's reminded us that he's provided the only solution we'll ever need. He's given us the provision to have for this, to face loneliness, that he is the only suitable solution that there is, to fill that gap, to fill that void, to fill that longing when we feel alone. And he shows us as embracing the cross. We go back to the beginning, it's him going back to just embracing the basic belief, and that's Jesus died on the cross for us. And so often we think that the cross is for those who are outside of faith, that those who are distant wanderers who are lost. We forget that the cross is a necessity for those everyday believers, that we draw to the cross because it's our reminder that the love of God and the peace that we receive and the hope that we share in comes from the cross. And so because of that, we find this redemptive power of the reconciled God, that he empowers the lonely, he empowers those who feel distant and hurt. We see this in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 through 16, as it talks about the promise we have for our Savior. It says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so we may receive power and find grace to help us in our time of need. In those stages and seasons of life when you feel like you're just distant, when you feel like everything's changed and you're no longer in the routine that you once were, and he says, just draw back to the cross. Draw back to the place where you all began. That Jesus led the example for you, that he made the way, that he walked the walk, he showed you the steps to take in order to follow him. And that even though he was tempted just like we are, even though he was tried, he was without sin, so that we would know the way to go, to follow after him. So Jesus knew the power of what it meant to walk with God. He understood the power of which he could go and to show, and he sent the disciples. He even knew the times when we were meant to be alone, as he drew the disciples with him, as he went away to go and to pray and to share, to truly be with God. He understood the power that we see, the significance of how we walk with God together in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 12. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, I understand this is probably one of the most common wedding ones, and I don't want to antagonize if that was you, but I always laugh when I'm in weddings because in my earlier years, when out of college, you're in a lot of weddings, and you hear a lot of those cheesy analogies, so sorry if that's you, but like love is a never-ending circle, right? Love just continues on and never stops, I was part of a wedding, and they spent 45 minutes talking about the ingredients of a marriage. I thought I was going to pass out. It was so hot, but I had one where it was the strands, and they had to actually braid it, and then they got messed up, and so they had to stop and keep going. It was one of those things where you're like, not a good example if they can't braid, right? So here you begin to see this true analogy of what it means to be corded together, to be combined with Christ, that our walk would be okay, but it's going to be overpowered. But when you put Christ in the middle of it, it becomes redefined, reconnected. And so in this moment, as he's writing here, as Jesus walks this walk and he draws us back to God, he shows us that we understand in a new season of life, it's recording yourself back together. It's weaving ourselves back and having Christ at the center of all that we do. And not to be dismayed, but to show us what that walk looks like. And so we begin to understand that in life, there's seasons and there's change, but it's also understanding how those things will affect us. Now, I don't know about you, but there's one thing I feel like that other people can buy and purchase and have a way better opinion than me, and that's fruit. For some reason, when other people bring fruit to things, I'm like, that is the best I've ever had. But when I go buy it, it's horrible. And everyone says, you got to look at the spots, and you got to look at the marks, and you got to thump it, and you got to listen. And I look like the idiot at Walmart, banging it, and I get home and it's rotten. And I'm like, I thought I did it right. You know what I'm talking about? Some people are like, that's me too, yeah. Or maybe you get it home and you're like, it looked beautiful, and then 2 days later it's all rotten, and you're like, I missed the season, it expired. And that's something valuable we need to understand about each season of life, seasons of ministry, and the way that we live is this. Every bit of fruit has an expiration date. It doesn't negate the last 10 years or when the fruit was good, but it can't go forever. And to understand, even though you would love to keep your children at home with you forever, you've been raising them for this moment to go out and conquer the world, to go and to follow where God has planned for them. And so this is that moment. It's not that, the last 20 years, you did a horrible job, so we're going to send them out to the... No. The fruit was good while it lasted, but it expired. And now it's time for new fruit. You wouldn't keep fruit in your house for the last 20 years. You keep buying new fruit. In the same way, sometimes in life, sometimes in ministry, the way that we serve, and the way that we walk with God, it's expired. It's sad to say, but sometimes the connection that you had with God was the one that you had from years ago. And it's time to get new fruit in your life. It's time to pick up a new walk, a new faith. And so it's time for us to realize that fruit that's rooted in, you will produce. And for some of you, the big challenge is to understand that the season of life I'm in, I'm not producing the same fruit I once was, but God's designed me to produce new fruit. He's going to change the fruit that you're creating in a whole new way. And it's understanding that in the way that you walk and journey with Him. That we would produce new fruit, not to negate what you used to do, not to negate what has been done, but it's time for new fruit in our lives. And we see this through just a few ways. Creating new fruit through a fresh faith, a fresh marriage, and fresh parenting. That we would walk with God. That this is all just about us walking together in a new season. When we don't know what to do, when we feel distant, rather than running away, but clinging to God. And whether this is in your life right now for graduates, whether you're going to college, or whether students are going to a new year's school, as you're getting older and you have new opportunities ahead of you, how do you handle those? Maybe it's a new career, maybe it's a new relation, whatever it is. But walking with God in those moments is key. Producing fresh fruit. It's not always worrying about bearing the fruit of old, but bearing the fruit that He's designed for you now. And so we see this in our fresh faith. To go back to the beginning, to go back to the years, assessing your walk. This is the time that you have in this moment in the season of life to just, God, where am I at? And where have I been? And where have I been lacking? And where do you want me to go forward with this? In this season of life for the empty nesters, you might say, I finally have the time to read that book, to study, to join that small group, to join a chat, whatever it is, to really allow my faith to grow and to develop. To allow this season to be used for your glory, God. So in the midst of the change, God, I want you to be first. I want your time to be there. As John 15:5 says, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me, I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And so if we're going to produce fresh fruit, if we're going to produce new fruit, we have to be rooted into the soil. We have to have a firm foundation into who God is, that he would lead us, to pour us, to help us grow into whatever he is asking you to be. That God has put something specific inside of you for you to be, and that we would help you discover that. And so it goes back to the beginning, that we would be rooted with him, that our walk would be in him to be fresh, to be new. Not the same faith that you've once possessed, that you've carried on and it's drug out over the years, but it's time to create something new, to share in this together. We go through this process together, and for years, you've lived in the hectic environment of a constant demanding, changing schedule of your home and of your children and everything you want to do. But now's the time you finally have the moment in the season to grasp this life. Psalm 73:24 says, you guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into the glory. And while your season of life has changed, it doesn't mean your purpose is done. That he walks with it, and he gives us a counsel. He needs to give us guidance for how to go and how to live and how to share, to take me to the glory. It's tweaking that mindset that we have, that the spiritual mindset that we have gathered over the years, and rather than just looking across an empty home and asking that question, now what? But what if it's the followers of Christ to turn to him and say, Lord, where are we going next? What would you have for me next? Because sometimes we so focus on sending our children out, but where is God sending me next? What would God have me do next in this process, in this journey? And so here we begin to see what it means for us to turn to him in the seasons of desperation, to pull into him and say, God, I need you to be my guide. I need you to be my source, to be my light in this world. It's interesting to see, as we were joking over the last few days as we've welcomed baby Jack into the world. And it's interesting because after you go and hold a new baby, last night as we're at home, I look and I see Lincoln in a whole new light. He looks like he grew up on me now. And the same thing happened when we had Luke, as we look at the pictures and it's like, for the month gap that you brought Luke home until Link got there, it's, wow. When did he grow up? When was there a man living in our house? And the thing is, though, sometimes when you're at home by yourself and when you look back and you think about the memories that you had, sometimes you forget what was actually taking place around you. And we think back and we're like, oh man, I wish I could just go back. Wish I could just go into those moments. But rather, what if when we were looking back and you see the blessings that surround you, maybe you remind yourself the blessings that once were then, and I can't only imagine the blessings that God will have for me in the future. That even though I wish I could stay in this realm and we wouldn't have to change and things wouldn't be different, but what if we'd say, God, you know what? I understand you've blessed me in the past and I can't wait to see the blessing you have for my future. And that's stepping out with courage and faith to say, God, I'm willing to walk within your presence. To walk within knowing that, God, as you lead me, you will show me and you will take me to glory. That within your hand, within your guidance, God, you will lead me. It's taking time to have a fresh perspective on your home and your marriage and your walk as you share together. That the time that you have now, before it's always all the voices and all the chaos. You never could finish a conversation and you always had Post-it notes on the fridge. Be here at this time, right? Quick text messages. And now you feel like, oh, we can talk. And now you miss the voices. You miss the fighting. You miss having to clean up the messes on the floor. See, the thing is, when you begin to think about your home and the way that you adapt, sometimes it's kind of nice being an empty nester. When you come back home, the house is the way you left it. You can eat on your schedule and your time. You can choose what you want to eat You don't have to eat hot dogs every night because that's all the kids want, right? You can pick your own meal. You can go spend time with your friends and do your activities. You can get away on weekend trips and you guys say, I want to go on a date. You can go on a date. You can do those simple things. But even more so than just your home, you're able to redefine how you can serve together. And where you might have served apart and we've always been going in two directions, now we can serve together. We can find things that are passionate about together, rewarding together as we share to this. And so as you realize that you find others who are in similar seasons and you go through the similar process, that you can be encouragement to those around you, but also you can find those younger than you and say, I want to pour into younger couples. I want to be with those who are going through what we've went through. In the same way as anybody in any season of life, find someone younger than you, pour into them, share with them, be a role model. It's using the experience that you have to better others, to help them avoid the pain that you've faced. And then finally we see here it's time to produce fresh fruit as a parent. And you think, well, I know the saying, once a parent, always a parent. And you're right. I'm not going to argue that with you. Because no matter how big your baby is, they're still your baby. And I can't change that. And you can't change that. Because you're going to love them the same. But here's the thing that you understand, is this is a season of life that you've prepared them for. That this is a season of life that you've helped them mature and to grow into, to send them out, to go and to discover. Because this is a season of life that you want to release and reconnect. The value in which that you're able to now to cherish your children as adults, to have conversations, to share life with, and to enable those moments together. And while they will always be your baby, I get that. But this is a season that you're able to enjoy a whole new experience with them. So now you can be able to encourage, you can be a motivator, biggest fan, give them counsel, but to understand that they are making choices now. You don't have to be in control, but you can encourage, you can share. That they understand that you've raised them for this moment. So Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. That you have prepared them to do these things, that God has prepared them for these things. And for us, it's to help them discover what God has put inside of them, for what God desires for them to become, that we would help them find that. And we see them, we understand, and amongst the chaos, it's time for them to go. And that you can share in this new pine that they would begin to find their own loved ones, begin their own families, begin their own careers, to find new opportunities. And as a parent, that you could help them with that. We understand there's going to be changes and hardship in their lives, and you can be there with them and walk beside them. And as a parent, you might understand, you know what, I'm going to have to change some things too. We're going to need some fresh fruit in our life, in our home, in our traditions, right? Well, we always celebrate Christmas at this time on this date with this meal. Well, you know what? That might not work for your kids and their spouses, and you're going to have to change the date to this time with this meal and this location. It's being flexible. It's being able to encourage to spend time together, but not also just demand that this is the only way we can do it. Once again, that fruit wasn't bad before, but sometimes it's time for new fruit. As your family grows, your family changes, that you and your walk can be an encouragement to your family in their growth, in their development. And even in this season when you feel like everything changes and everything feels so distant and longing, to understand that your purpose that God has for you is so huge. That this season of life is so valuable. Not only as you reconnect with God, not only as you grow in your life and your home, but to understand that you can be an encouragement to the next, to help build up the future generation that follows after you. And so while this change will redefine you, I pray that it grows you as well. You allow God to work in your life today. But don't let loneliness pull you away, but rather the season of change in life be the thing that helps you cling closer to God, to walk closer with Him and produce new fruit.